I have never been a face-to-face person. I solve all my problems with satisfaction, but never by confrontation. I am happy, and I am fine with that. However, I have come to realize that this is a concept that my wife cannot understand. I am Ted Briscoe, and I have been married to Angela for 10 years. Angela is not a dazzling beauty with huge breasts and long blonde hair, just an ordinary housewife with brown hair and brown eyes. We have twin daughters who are still in elementary school. I work as an insurance agent. Nothing exciting or impressive, but I make good money, and the leftovers that accumulate will provide for my retirement. I had assumed we got married because we loved each other, but now I'm not so sure. Angela seemed comfortable with the way things were for the first few years. I think it was the novelty of being married and having a family. We attended company social events and neighbors with the kids whenever we could. Lately, Angela seemed to be impressed with husbands who had important or dynamic jobs. It seemed that the job had less to do with money and more to do with prestige. She wasn't like that when we married, and now it seemed to have intensified. I got the feeling that she was less and less impressed by my status at work or as a husband. To her, my job was not something to brag about. However, the bigger problem seemed to be my non-confrontational attitude when it came to problem solving. I usually accepted a quiet solution to most difficulties, which annoyed her. She seemed to believe that a real man should face his problems head-on and win by intimidation. It was a concept I couldn't swallow. I think this is what led to my current dilemma. Please understand, I am not a wimp or a cuckold. I may not seem very manly, but I will not allow myself to be shit on. However, I will refrain from direct confrontation with the enemy. My methods sometimes seem inappropriate for a real man, but I'm more interested in results than appearance. What people think of me doesn't matter as long as I get the upper hand. Many of the things I do, a real man would not stoop to under any circumstances. There are more important things than pride. My wife finds that unacceptable. Today I'm sitting in my car, around the corner from my house. The kids left for school, and I left for work 20 minutes ago. My job is flexible, so slacking off after hours is not a problem as long as I get the job done. What I'm looking forward to doesn't happen every day, and I'm here in anticipation. I didn't have coffee at breakfast, so I don't have to worry about taking a leak. After another 20 minutes, a black and white police car drove slowly down the street and stopped at my door. Frank Perella, one of the best in the city, got out of the car and waved to his partner as he pulled away. A minute later, Frank walked through my front door. You can see the complexity of my situation. How can a man with my character flaws put up with his wife having an affair with a police officer? Who should I report this to, and how can I validate it? I'm sure most people will disapprove of what I'm planning, but I'm not like most people, and I don't live my life to satisfy most people. Anyone who wears blinders that show the qualities of real men will judge me. I don't care because I want results. When I was in elementary school, I suffered from the same weak character traits I have now. I don't think I developed them. I think I was born with them. I'm sure there is a scientific name for them, but I never bothered to look it up. Of course, I've never had any therapy or anything like that. In 5th grade, I made a good friend named Charlie Higgins. Charlie was the complete opposite of me. He was big, ugly, and always in the public eye. He wasn't really smart, and I quickly discovered that he couldn't read. We spent a lot of time together that year, and by the time we got to 6th grade, Charlie was reading as well as anyone in the class. He always remembered the special lessons and the fact that I was doing it unnoticed by others. Charlie stayed by my side until we moved on to 10th grade. It was nice because no one ever bothered me when he was around. Unfortunately, Charlie liked girls too, and before the end of the year, one of them got knocked up by him. He dropped out of school, married the girl, and got a job as a mason's helper. Soon, Charlie became the father of a little girl. I kept tabs on Charlie, but we didn't maintain a close relationship. I kept a low profile after Charlie left, but as fate would have it, I became the target of a bully athlete, Troy Manning, in my senior year. I did everything I could to avoid him, with the exception of running away. I could never outdo him at anything, whether it was physical or verbal. Troy enjoyed subjecting me to public humiliation in the hallways and on school grounds. The fact that he was one of the toughest athletes in the school meant that he had received several good soccer scholarship offers. Like all athletes, his pride and joy was his varsity jacket, which he wore every day whether it was hot or cold. India ink comes in a cute little square bottle with a short spout. Of course, they are indelible. I had no problem getting a hall pass, and it was easy to just pour the entire bottle of ink through the vents of Troy's locker. You don't have much control in such an endeavor, but I was successful enough to render the jacket unusable for the rest of the year. Of course, school jackets can't just be replaced by going to the corner store. Poor Troy had to do without one. No one ever found out who doused him. Unfortunately, the bullying didn't stop, and then Troy started wearing his varsity sweater, as I expected. It wasn't as impressive as the jacket, but he still used it to strut around, looking important. The first part of the training was complete. The next day, I went to school with a new bottle of ink and a sock with 3 golf balls inside. I don't like pain, and I'm not a masochist, but extreme measures were necessary to right my wrong. Since Troy's locker was next to the boys' bathroom, I planned to linger at the door when he discovered that his favorite sweater was also in ink. He was furious, and all the kids in the hallway couldn't help but notice his tantrum. I stood at the restroom door with a smug grin on my face, hoping he would look in my direction. And sure enough, he did. He needed someone to take his rage out on, and I teased him. He stormed out, pushed me into the restroom, and pinned me against the wall. All the boys who were in the restroom ran out into the hallway with the rest of the crowd. There was more noise and bluster from him than anything else, and I was a little disappointed in his sluggish attack because it meant more work for me. He left no marks on me. Hitting yourself in the head and face with a sock full of golf balls is cruel, to say the least. It would have been easier to get someone to do it for me, but I was determined. It only took a few minutes, and I was swollen enough to realize that I would have 2 black eyes and a severely bleeding nose. Unfortunately, due to some miscalculations, I had also knocked out one of my fangs, so that it was almost coming out. It would take a few minutes for my eyes to start going dark, and that was okay. Golf balls flew out the bathroom window and into the bushes below, and a torn sock went into the trash can. I stretched out on the floor in one of the stalls. A few minutes later, a student came in and found me. The school nurse decided it was best to send me to the hospital emergency room. Not only was Troy Manning suspended, but he was stripped of all scholarships. My tooth healed normally, and my face was completely healed by the time we had to have pictures taken for graduation. No one picked on me for the rest of the year. Troy, of course, denied everything. Frank Perella was my new Troy Manning. 2 hours later, a black and white car pulled up in front of the house. Frank walked out the front door, and I watched as my loving wife kissed him goodbye. She was wearing a bathrobe. I waited about 5 minutes and entered the house. As I suspected, the shower was running water. The bed was still a mess, and her clothes were lying on the floor. Next to the bedside table was a wastebasket with a light blue plastic bag stuffed in it. Inside the plastic bag were 2 used condoms, neatly tied. At least she was practicing safe sex. That was all I needed to see. I quietly left the house and went to work. When I got home from work in the evening, I ducked into the garage and pulled a blue bag out of the trash can. I put 2 condoms in the Ziploc bag and put it on my desk at work where I was sure Angela wouldn't find it. All the swimmers were dead by this time, but the DNA lives on. By the end of the 2nd week, I had 10 filled condoms. It was time for the next step in my plan. Frank never came to my house on Fridays. I found out that he was visiting his mother at a nursing home downtown that day. His partner dropped him off at 10 a.m. and picked him up around 11 a.m. I had several customers in the building, and it was not difficult to make an appointment with one of them. All the seniors look forward to the company, even if it is an insurance agent. There was a security camera at the entrance to the underground parking garage in the senior building, but it was the only one. Very few of the residents were driving, so most of the cars using the garage were visitors in some way. One afternoon, I had a long lunch and headed out on the interstate highway. There were several adult video stores near the entrance ramps. The first 2 places had only videos, but the third also had toys. For $20, I bought a set of giant anal balls. I asked the salesman if he had any recommendations, and he said to use more lube. That sounded tempting to me. A pickle syringe and a 30-centimeter aquarium tube completed my shopping list. I was ready to go. Angela grew more sullen by the day. Her contempt for me was steadily increasing. Wednesday morning was important to my plan. I usually avoided her taunts and teasing, but today I responded. As I was finishing breakfast, she made a snide remark about the fact that I was no longer having sex with her. She went over my manhood several times. It was just what I was looking for. I'm sorry, darling. Even if your lover uses condoms, I still don't want to risk catching a sexual disease. I hope you understand. She stood with her usual smirk on her face, just looking at me. It's only in the last few months that she started treating me like this. She didn't say anything. It was like she was provoking me to say more. I don't think you realize the seriousness of the situation you've put yourself in. The smile from her face suddenly disappeared. She began to fidget a little and her eyes raced around the room. Now she didn't know what to do. As I started to walk out the door, I turned around and said, "He won't be able to protect you forever." As I walked away, I noticed the slight fear in her gaze. It worked perfectly. By the time I got to work, there was a police car on my back bumper. I was sitting in my car with the window open when Frank Perella approached. He leaned on my car door and made me the meanest face he was capable of. "Who the hell do you think you are, asshole? My relationship with your wife is none of your business, and I'd advise you to stay out of it and keep your mouth shut. If you make any more smart-ass remarks about Angela, I'll make sure you get a good time in Graterford. I'm sure some of the guys there would love to have you as a cellmate. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good!" Chuckles. He gave me one of his confident smirks and walked back to the squad car. I was sure Angela would call him after I left the house, and I hoped he'd stop me. I turned off the recorder and got to work. It promised to be a good day. Dinner that night was very quiet. The girls and I chatted a bit, but Angela hardly said a word. The smug, cocky smile that had been on her face was gone. Every time I caught her eyes on me, she quickly averted her eyes. She avoided eye contact at all costs. Until today, she looked at me with mild disdain. I hadn't even proceeded with my plan, but she was beginning to be wary. Although she might not have liked me anymore, she seemed to know me. The uncertain future made her feel very uncomfortable. I don't believe Frank could have said anything that would have made it go away. Thursday, I spent the day preparing for the big day. I found the nearest hospital emergency room and dialed my lawyer's number on speed dial. A bit of rough sandpaper gave the anal balls a deadly surface. I collected the fluid from each condom and placed it in a small medicine bottle. I attached a tube to the marinade injector so it wouldn't fall off. Everything was carefully timed, and I repeated it 100 times to make sure it was perfect. That night, Angela slept with the girls. I didn't ask why. The hardest part of my plan was the insertion of the anal balls. I roughened them up quite a bit and then pushed them as deep into my rectum as I could. It hurt like hell to insert, and I wasn't going to look forward to removal. I inserted them just before leaving the house. 4 hours later, my ass should be hurting badly. It was about 10 on the baton when the patrol car dropped Frank off near the elevator at the nursing home. A few minutes later, I took the same elevator up to see Martha Forbush. Martha was 70 and loved company. I spent about 20 minutes with her and then quietly left. She knows I was there, but her idea of the time was a little confused. It was a painful visit because I had to sit with those damn balloons inside. Once safely to my car, I tore my coat slightly, as well as a couple of belt loops and the seam on my pants. I kept a close eye on the time. Frank seemed to be a punctual guy. I filled the pickle syringe with the liquid from the medicine vial. There was still some left, so I reached back and dabbed some on my boxers and shirt. Just in time, Frank came out of the elevator, and a moment later the black and white picked him up. Now there was pain. I grabbed the shoelace from the anal balls and yanked as if it were a Band-Aid. It was very uncomfortable, but I was relieved when I pulled them out. The pickle injector was a good choice. Inserting the tube into the butt end, I poured the entire load inside. I walked out the back of the garage and dumped all my supplies down the storm drain. Why would anyone want to watch? Looking as shocked and unkempt as I could, I piled into the St. Joseph's emergency room and announced to the world that I had been raped. Immediately, the police and the Rape Crisis Center were called. I was taken to an exam room where I was stripped and my clothes were put in a bag. An internal examination showed a rectal injury and a large amount of fluid. I was worried that I might have overdone it, but I was afraid I might lose some on my way to the hospital. The doctor confirmed that I had indeed been raped and left me with the lab technician. About this time, the police and a representative of the rape squad arrived. They asked the lab technician to leave for a while and then spent 30 minutes getting information from me. When I said that I thought my rapist might be a police officer, the room became quiet. Since the DNA of all government employees is recorded for exclusionary purposes, the woman in charge of rape investigations assured me that they would have a positive result within 24 hours. She was confident that all police officers would be exonerated by then. The hospital notified Angela of the incident and asked her to bring some clothes for me to the hospital. She delivered the clothes, but didn't bother to look in on me or inquire about my condition. After the police left, the lab technician returned. She was a young girl in her early 20s. She had straight blonde hair and very fair skin with freckles. "My name is Ted. I'm sorry, we haven't been introduced. They call me Jilly. My real name is Jillian." She looked at me strangely with a slight smile. I watched as she filled out forms and laid out samples for what would be done with them. "Jilly, who's going to get a copy of the DNA report?" "The police." "That's it?" "The lab will provide certified copies to anyone who wants or needs one. Why do you ask?" "Could you sign me and my attorney up to get a copy, please?" "Sure, no problem. Anything else?" "What are you doing with the remaining samples?" "You know, there's a surplus." "We usually just throw them away." "Why do you ask?" "Can you tag them or certify the remaining samples and then keep them?" "Sure. We have a secure storage facility and we can ensure that the samples are not compromised." "I think I'm in love with you, Jilly. Can you do all this for me?" By this time I was dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed. Jilly sat down next to me and smiled. "I can take care of everything for you, and maybe even more if you promise to buy me dinner." "I'm married." "I know, but I bet you won't be married much longer." "What's this all about? I'm not Brad Pitt. Why are you interested in having dinner with me?" "I think you're a very smart man, and I want to get to know you better. I think I know what you did tonight, but I don't know exactly how you did it. I'll keep quiet if you buy me dinner tonight. That wasn't part of my plan. I didn't allow it, but I like that girl. Meet me at the Outback at 7 o'clock. It's a date. Can I call you a cab so you can go home? Your wife left half an hour ago." "My car's in the garage across the street. I think I can make it to this place. I'll see you at 7. Apart from the unexpected conversation with Jilly, everything went exactly as I'd planned. The next few days were going to be exciting. Angela was sitting in the living room when I got home. "Thank you for taking my clothes to the hospital. I would have appreciated a ride." "I'm sorry. I wasn't sure how long you'd be gone, and I wanted to be here when the girls got home from school. I went upstairs to take a shower." "Oh, by the way, I'm fine. Nothing to worry about. Thanks for asking." Later, when I went downstairs, Angela was still sitting in the same pose. She looked at me but didn't say anything. The arrogant smirk was gone. It was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Dinner was 3 hours away. I decided to go for a drive. As I backed out of the driveway, the girls were just getting home from school. Damn, my butt hurt. Dinner was an absolute pleasure. Although it was quiet and measured, I had a great time. Jilly and I were like cat and mouse. I didn't admit to anything, and she didn't tell me about her suspicions. She had been raised by her mother and had never had a man or father in her life. I got the feeling that she didn't trust or socialize with men at all. It took us an hour to eat our salad before we ordered our food. We spent the entire evening repeating the same thing. She told me how smart I was, and I told her how insightful she was. We were there for over 2 hours, talking constantly and basically never saying anything. It was wonderful, but only a twisted mind can imagine the joy of it. We promised to meet again on Monday night. When I got home, I found Angela sleeping with the girls again. I had provided for her and given her everything. She had thrown it away and now seemed to not know what to do. Frank was married and had a family of his own. He would leave her in a second, and she knew it. She also knew that I would never take her back. Angela was caught in the middle, and it was making her miserable. I had once loved her, but now there was no love or pity for her. I truly believed she was afraid of me. Maybe Frank would protect her. I left home early Sunday morning and was gone all day. I found all sorts of ways to kill time without spending a lot of money. When I got home around 6, I found the house empty. Angela had left me a note. She had picked up the girls and gone to visit her parents in Tennessee. There was no mention of when she might return. Most of their clothes were gone. It looked like she was planning on staying for a long time. I guess I was relieved. First thing in the morning, I stopped by Seymour Schlump's office. Seymour was a little secretive, but as a lawyer, I liked him. He'd already gotten the DNA results from the lab by overnight mail. I think it was Jilly's idea. There was no doubt about it. My rapist was Frank Perella. I explained to Seymour why I'd sent him a copy of the test results. He said it was a great idea under the circumstances. I gave him a copy of the tape of Officer Perella threatening me. I told him about the affair Perella was having with my wife and gave him the times and dates. At 10 o'clock, Seymour and I were in the district attorney's office. Two imposing men with folders and clipboards entered the room. After introducing themselves to each other, they began to explain that they could not proceed with the investigation because there was no DNA evidence. Seymour started laughing, and I found it hard to keep a nonchalant expression on my face. Gentlemen, under the circumstances, we anticipated that the DNA results would be inaccurate, so we sent some duplicates. I know it's a bit unusual, but it seems worth the effort, doesn't it? I think it's important to make sure that justice is done, don't you? Seymour slid 2 copies of the DNA results across the table to the men who were supposed to represent me. The original was filed at the courthouse at 9 o'clock this morning. These are just working copies. I was afraid the original might get lost again. Seymour was good. That's why I hired him. The district attorney and his assistant both sighed at the same time and sort of went limp in their chairs. You knew it was Frank Perella before we even entered this room, didn't you? Neither of them answered the question. After a few seconds, the district attorney began to speak. Why would Frank Perella, a distinguished and decorated officer, do this? I'm sorry, but it's unthinkable. Seymour smiled from ear to ear. Officer Perel was having an affair with Mr. Briscoe's wife, Angela. It went on for months. His partner could attest to that. When Mr. Briscoe confronted his wife and asked her to stop, she immediately told Frank Perella. Officer Perella and his partner then pulled Mr. Briscoe over in his patrol car, and Officer Perella threatened to send Mr. Briscoe to jail if he did not drop the subject. The district attorney leaned back in his chair and smiled. That's the biggest nonsense I've ever heard. There's no way you can convince me or a jury that it ever happened. Finally, I'd had enough. I raised my hand towards Seymour, showing that I wanted to talk. I leaned over the table and looked the district attorney straight in the eye. You're supposed to be on my side. This is the second time in 10 minutes that you've concluded that I'm a liar. If you do it again, I will file a grandstanding lawsuit against you and the entire city with huge media coverage. Sit here, shut up, and listen. When the tape ends, I expect an apology from both of you. I pressed the play button on my recorder. Seymour leaned back in his chair and smiled. Who the hell do you think you are, asshole? My relationship with your wife is none of your business, and I'd advise you to keep your nose out of it and keep your mouth shut. If you make any more smart-ass remarks about Angela, I'll make sure you get a good time in Graterford. I'm sure some of the guys there would love to have you as a cellmate. Do I make myself clear? I leaned back in my chair and let Seymour take the lead. Do you recognize Frank Perel's voice, or do we need an expert to confirm it for you? Maybe Internal Affairs will take an interest in the case. I immediately received apologies from both gentlemen. Seymour and I apologized and got up to leave. Call me when you get your thoughts together and we'll talk again. Seymour was good. Also, before the end of the day, I'd like to get an injunction to keep all uniformed police officers away from Mr. Briscoe. The situation seemed ripe for retaliation. The 2 men in suits just sat there and watched us leave. Jilly and I had a great time at the Olive Garden that night. She wanted me to go to her place for a nightcap, but I chickened out. Maybe next time, I told her. Somehow the whole story leaked to the local paper. They didn't hide any of the names of the people involved, including Angela. It didn't matter much, since she wasn't there, and I doubted she'd ever come back. It did matter, however, to Frank Perel's wife and her 2 brothers-in-law. Frank was beaten to a pulp, and he wouldn't say who did it. I always wondered if he was beaten for cheating or for having sex with a man. Either way, the results were the same. Things were not going well for Frank. In the end, he was forced to plead guilty. He got 5 years but avoided the publicity of a trial. He was supposed to serve his sentence at GW on Graterford West. That's where they sent white-collar criminals and dirty cops. Among regular people, Frank would have been in big trouble. Which brings me to my old friend Charlie. A while back, some idiot hit on Charlie's wife and he ended up in the hospital. Charlie ended up doing his time at GW because they had a masonry school. He spent 2 years in a maximum security colony teaching a group of cons how to lay bricks. I visited Charlie's wife, Josie. Their daughter, Sarah, had graduated from high school and had been accepted to dental hygienist school in Boyertown. The only problem was that she had to pay $6,000 in tuition. Since Charlie was in prison, the family had to depend on Josie's income. I knew all this in advance, so I came prepared. I gave Josie a check for the tuition and a sealed envelope. I asked her to give the envelope to Charlie the next time she came for a date. Seymour prepared and mailed the divorce papers to Angela at her parents' home in Bristol. I granted her child custody and monthly child support, but not alimony. Her infidelity was well documented, and Seymour took care of it. Jilly and I discussed the possibility of me trying to get custody, but we both agreed that I was too unstable to be an effective father. I actually got along quite well with both of my daughters, and sometimes felt that I was closer to them than their mother. Jilly and I were soulmates. Wow, that's deep. She's the only girl I've ever felt comfortable with. I didn't tell her all my secrets, and she didn't share her secrets with me, but somehow we bonded. Since Angela was gone and would soon be out of my life forever, I had no qualms about sleeping with Jilly. She moved into the house with me. The house was rented, so that wouldn't be a problem during the divorce. She wasn't a very good cook, but she was good at almost everything else. We often ate out of the house. Jilly had some sort of mysterious aura about her. I found that out later. Angela signed and returned the papers almost immediately. She didn't ask for anything or even hire a lawyer. In 3 months, I would be free. I didn't have to stay here until the end. Jilly and I spent a lot of time talking about the possibilities of moving. We wanted it to be a little warmer, but not too hot. We decided it would be nice to do without snow, but we still wanted 4 seasons. Getting a transfer at my company wouldn't be a problem. Jilly could get a job almost anywhere. Huntsville, Alabama seemed like the perfect place for us. It was close to Nashville and Chattanooga, and taxes were high. You could buy a good house for half the price of most other places. We both gave notice and started packing. Before we left, I learned that Frank Perella had been brutally beaten in the kitchen pantry at Graterford West. The guards suggested that it was some sort of revenge by the inmates with whom he had had previous contact. He was kicked so hard in the groin that his bladder and testicles were permanently damaged. I received a nice letter from Charlie thanking me for the help I had given Sarah. He also thanked me for Josie. I didn't say anything to Charlie, but Seymour was working on getting his sentence reduced. Up until that point, everything had gone as planned. We weren't expecting a phone call from Angela's parents. "Ted, this is Mary, Angela's mother. I'm sorry to bother you, but we need help." "What kind of help? What's the matter?" "Angela doesn't take care of the girls. She won't go near them. She claims they're demons and they're mad at her because of what she did to you." "That doesn't sound normal." "She refuses to tell us exactly what she did to you that they are upset about. In fact, she pretty much refuses to talk about anything. We really need your help." "Other than that, is she okay?" "No. She sits in her room all day with the door locked. I have to bring her food. I think she's afraid of her own daughters." "What do you want me to do?" "You have to come and get the girls. We can take care of Angela, but not the girls, too." "All right. We'll be passing through Bristol on Saturday. We'll stop and pick them up. Let's get everything ready." "Thank you, Ted. We appreciate it." I explained to Jilly that I wasn't cut out to be a parent. With my quirky personality traits, the girls would grow up to be as quirky as me. On the outside, I seem normal, but on the inside, I am far from it. It wasn't fair to subject 2 innocent girls to that kind of environment. After a few hours, she decided we should give it a try. Jilly would be a stay-at-home mom. For some reason, I got the feeling she expected it. We rented a small cabin west of Huntsville for 1 year. The internet is a great invention. Our furniture and other things were to be delivered shortly after we got there. Bristol was just up the road. Jilly was nervous about meeting the girls. I was nervous about the upcoming meeting with Angela. However, things didn't work out as expected. I couldn't tell Jilly that my daughters were a little unusual. They weren't normal little girls, just like their father wasn't a normal man. It was something I tried to ignore but always realized. Angela's parents greeted us with a sigh of relief. We walked into the house, and when Angela saw me, she immediately ran to her room and locked the door. I guess I wasn't worried about anything. I decided to leave it at that. Jilly was standing in the living room when my two daughters walked up. They looked at each other for a few seconds, and then a wide smile appeared on all three faces. I felt like they were having a private joke and I was left out. However, I was very pleased with the first meeting. The girls walked over to Jilly and each of them hugged her legs, something they had never done with their mother. Jilly placed her hands on each of their heads and smiled. "Jilly, I would like you to meet my daughters, Lilith and Sibylla." I had a strange feeling that no introduction was necessary. I think the next few years of my life are going to be very interesting.